No surrender, no defeat. Maybe it's time for an Evercade retreat.
Hello and welcome to the Evercade Retreat, and I'm Gene Joke, and today I'm doing another ranking review, this time of the C64 collection, Volume 2 for the Evercade. I was a fan of the first C64 collection. It had a nice mixture of games I knew and liked, and there was a little bit of discovery in there as well. It was a definite mix of nostalgia and discovery. So how does this one compare? Well, let's get on with the ranking and find out.
Number 14.
Street Sports Basketball is naturally part of the same series as Street Sports Baseball, which was on C64 Collection 1. Released by Epics, it's a series of sports games in which a bunch of kids play sports on the streets. One of the barriers to this game, or these games, is essentially you have to sort of select your team and pick them all out and things. So starting a game and setting it all up takes a bit of time. Not massive amounts of time, but it's just a bit of a barrier for getting into it. The game itself is a fairly straightforward basketball game, and I'd go as far as to say it's quite playable. Simple controls, easy to get into, not the most exciting thing, but for a sports game of its era, I think it's pretty good. Key point of its era. Generally older sports games don't hold up too well, and I think this one does fairly well, and graphically it's fine. It's very C64. It's perfectly fine for what it is, but just not something I'd play that often.
Number 13.
Slayer is a horizontally scrolling shoot-'em-up released by Houston on their budget label. It's pretty much a standard shoot-'em-up. Got a couple of power-ups, you got some bosses, you've got 3 levels, 3 very challenging levels, and the game loops. Visually it's not bad for a C64 game, and while it's clearly inspired by arcade shoot-'em-ups of the era, there are things it does differently, whether it's down to the inexperience of the game designers or limitations of the hardware, who knows. Well, the bosses are very static, there are just certain areas you need to target. Also very simple once you work them out, aside from being very bullet spongy. The environment is as much a hazard as many of the enemies. I don't mean just because you can crash into it and explode, but it has some tight spaces to fit through and placement which will make this more of an issue. Also can't kill all the enemies. Some of the enemies will zoom onto the screen so quickly that unless you already know what's coming, you've got no chance of avoiding them. It has all the key ingredients of a decent shoot-'em-up. It's like the designers didn't quite know how to put all those ingredients together and design a decent game. It's okay, but I don't think it's one you're going to come back to a lot.
Number 12.
Mission Impossible is an isometric action adventure where you control a bubble, going around collecting various notes or bits of scroll, if you like, in a specific order, and saving a baby bubble and escorting it back to the beginning of the level. Rinse and repeat through various levels. To make this more difficult, there are various enemies around, and there are teleporters which take you to different land sections, so navigating the levels is a bit of a pain at times until you learn them. But also you're doing this against the clock. There's various elements to this game that I suppose are designed to make it interesting and exciting, but ultimately it's just okay. You can power up your attack, your bubble attack, and well, that's about it. People familiar with the C64 game library will probably recognise some of the levels as they're inspired by other games. It's okay, but it's just not really that exciting, and ultimately does get a bit tedious after a little while.
Number 11.
SamZara is a run and gun in the way that pretty much only the C64 or the home micros could do. And chances are first impressions are going to be pretty negative on this one. It'll kill you quick if you don't know what you're doing. Visually it's very distinct and also very C64. Sounds really fit the vibe of the game as well. Controls are simple. Up to jump, B to fire, and the other buttons select your sub weapon, which you'll essentially hold for your fire button to use. Limited ammo, whereas your main weapon has infinite ammo. Using these sub-weapons will be pretty much essential for getting through the game. 29 levels to get through with a 15-minute time limit to complete all of them. Fortunately the levels are very short, but as I said, the game will kill you quick. But you also have to be extremely quick on getting through the levels. Forgiving, this game is not. With a bit of perseverance, there's something to enjoy here, but it's definitely one that's not easy to get into. To beat it, I had to seriously abuse save states. I don't think I'd have had the patience to do it all fully without save states. I don't like the game enough to keep to try, to be honest. Jumping feels a bit weird. It's quite unique how it works. You can jump repeatedly, effectively floating. Action is very fast paced, and yeah, it's got sort of a good feel to it, but also not. Probably the best, like I say, it's a game I wanted to like, but I found it hard to really enjoy.
Number 10.
World Games is obviously part of the Games series by Epix. Their graphics are nice, the sounds do their job, the presentation is largely the same as ever, although there's a bit of background information about the specific events here. It plays very much like the others. Really, your preference on the games is going to come down to whether you like the events in a specific game or not. Here you have things like cliff dive, sumo wrestling, caber tossing, barrel rolling, rodeo, bucking bronco thing, whatever you call it. There are some fun events here and some that aren't so fun. I mean, the sumo wrestling I just don't get on with. Barrel rolling, again, don't really get on with that one. The barrel jump I find quite fun. Yeah, there's some pretty good ones here, but again, it's a games. Your mileage may vary on such things. I like them well enough in the right circumstances.
Number 9.
California Games by Epix is much like the other games in the Games series by Epix. There's a series of different events, they control differently, and you're essentially competing for score either against a computer or against other human players. The events do vary, and so you've got some good ones here. I like the surfing and the footbag, the disc throw is okay, the skating's alright, BMX is okay, and I'm not really a fan of the half pipe. Maybe it's just because I suck at it. I mean, it's fine, the graphics look nice, the presentation is exactly the same as all the other games really, and there's not really a huge amount to say about it. It's fine, I like it well enough under the right circumstances. Your mileage may vary.
Number 8.
Firelord is an action-adventure game which was, I believe, originally on the ZX Spectrum and ported to the C64. At least it certainly looks like a ZX Spectrum port. You control Sir Galahad as you basically on a quest to go and retrieve a bunch of charms to trade or steal from a witch and so on and so forth. You can read the manual for the plot, it doesn't matter. In gameplay terms, it's a flick screen game. You run around from screen to screen, picking up items, going to shops to trade for other items and information to eventually get the items you need to go and then retrieve the final item. Where it gets more complicated is your health is always draining, so you have to be constantly picking up health items. On each screen, ghosts or enemies appear out of nowhere. If you have magic gems, you can shoot them. If you don't, you just have to avoid them. Also, you have barter energy, which so if you use all that up and don't have items which will replenish it, you can effectively not be able to go and barter in shops, which can be problematic. It's a very obtuse game, and trying to figure out what you're doing and how to do things, nothing is intuitive or really spelled out for you. So finding out how to play the game is the main challenge. There's so many things wrong with this game, but it's a very typical Spectrum game, and it's one I played as a kid and I enjoyed, but I didn't really know what I was doing. I just enjoyed running around exploring and trying to figure things out, and that's been most of my experience playing it on the Evercade. I've had to look up walkthroughs to figure out how to beat the game, and I still haven't managed it. It's just I've gotten close and things, and something keeps going wrong, even with save states. So I just need to get better, I suppose, but I don't really have that much will to. Definitely tickles my nostalgia gland, and I'm glad I played through it again, but I can't really call it a good game, which is why it's ranked here.
Number 7.
Cyberoid is a flick-screen shoot-'em-up released by Houston. It's a game I first played on the ZX Spectrum, and I'd never played the C64 version until getting this collection on the Evercade. It's a slightly unconventional shoot-'em-up, one being flick-screen, but also the way the game works as a whole. There are power-ups to collect, but you start out with quite an arsenal of weaponry, and you use different buttons to select them, and you activate them by holding fire. So orbs to collect, as well as a reverse fire add-on. The game is difficult, certainly to get started with anyway. There are sections where there's some fairly precision, almost platforming to do, and because the gravity affects your ship, meaning you're always moving down the screen unless you're pushing up, it makes it a bit more tricky. You can play with music or sound effects and some absolutely fantastic music, so your choice of which way you go. Visually, it's quite a good looking game with some very sort of almost Giga-esque visuals. Lots of ugly monsters and terrain and bioorganic type imagery. Not only do you have to navigate the levels and work your way from screen to screen to reach the end of them, you also have to collect loot from the enemies. If you haven't collected enough by the end of the level, you essentially fail it, but you will still progress to the next level. And there are only 3 levels, so it's not a big game, but the difficulty more than makes up for it. I doubt most people even see the second level. This is a game I've got nostalgia for, and I enjoyed playing it as a kid. I never got that far into it. Like I said, it's a challenging game. Playing it now, I do have less patience for it. It's definitely not a very pick up and play kind of shoot 'em up unless you're already very familiar with it. Definitely not a game for everyone. That said, I have nostalgia for it. I do kind of like it. It just frustrates me as well.
Number 6.
Insects in Space is a Defender clone from the guys at Sensible Software. It really is pretty much just that, a Defender clone with some very distinct and quite abrasive aesthetics. In place of a spaceship, you control an angel with her boobs hanging out. In place of aliens, you have insects, and there's lots of buzzing sound effects. There's also a lot of lightning effects, which are pretty much designed to induce a seizure. I mean, you could be reductive and say reductive gameplay and sort of obnoxious aesthetics, and it's not going to be a great game. The thing is, it's a good Defender clone, and your mileage on the aesthetics, well, that might vary. The flashing imagery really doesn't bother me. The sort of buzzing sound effects are a bit irritating. But other than that, yeah, it's a fun game. It's Defender. There's really not a huge amount more I can say about it. It plays well and it's quite fun, and I say that as someone who's never been a huge Defender fan.
Number 5.
Nebulous was a well-regarded game that was released for various home micros and even ported to the Game Boy and the NES. You control a weird-looking character called Pogo, who essentially will navigate his way up these various towers. When he reaches the top, he'll detonate them or set off a bomb or topple them for whatever, and then reach back down to the bottom again, get in the submarine, shoot a few fish and capture them, and move on to the next tower to topple that one. In some cases, the game was actually called Tower Toppler or Castellian. Graphically, it's generally good. The effect of the tower rotating as you move around it clockwise or anti-clockwise is very impressive, or was for the time. It's clear cut, it's easy to tell exactly what's supposed to be what. In true C64 fashion, there is only in-game sound effects, but there's music on the title screen, which is well done. The gameplay itself is something that will definitely divide opinion. Controls are fairly straightforward: left, right, jump, and fire. As you guide Pogo up the towers, you'll come across disappearing platforms which will make you fall to those below, and if you fall into the water then you lose a life. Enemies will also knock you down a level. Enemies generally follow simple set patterns. There is an enemy that will come along and so often and will target your level of elevation and will come across the screen. Various sort of puzzles in the navigation to solve, and it's very trial and error. There's also a time limit to contend with as well. Essentially you have to get through the levels, I wouldn't say perfectly, but you have to learn them and execute them without too much delay, or you're going to run out of time before you get to the top, particularly on the later levels. As a kid, this game absolutely stumped me. Fortunately, in this day and age of save states and being able to find videos for things online, it's a lot more manageable than it was back in the 80s. Now, I'm sure from my description you probably have a good idea whether this game will appeal to you or not. But if it does appeal and you do persevere with it, there's a lot of fun to be had with it, or at least a lot of satisfaction from finally conquering the levels at least.
Number 4.
Pit Stop 2 is a racing game where you have to make pit stops, as the name might suggest. As far as C64 racing games go, or racing games on the home micros or even on the 8-bit systems, it is quite technically impressive. Your tyres will wear down, which will force you to make pit stops, and of course strategically you have to work out whether it's worth risking making a pit stop or to try and get another lap at it before your tyres blow. If your tyres blow, it's game over. Also, you have a fuel gauge, and you've got to fuel up your car, and that's another part of your pit stop and your strategy in running the game. Other than that, it's fairly standard racing stuff with a fair few options, and I say it's very impressive for the time, and it's still a fun game to play now. As a kid, I liked this game, but I could never really get to grips with the pit stops, and I kept mucking up and losing time, and I could never work out what I was doing wrong. But that's just me being a stupid kid and not realising you could make one guy fuel the car while you're changing tires with the other guy. But I was a kid, okay? The racing itself is very much of its era. The handling isn't too bad, but again, it's of its era. Take that into consideration. There's a lot of fun you can have with this game. Now, I'm not a huge racing game fan, so that's why it's ranked where it is, but I say it is a very good game for the C64, and I think really still shines quite well in spite of its age.
Number 3.
Impossible Mission 2 is naturally the sequel to Impossible Mission, which was my favourite game off the first C64 collection. I have played this one back in the day, but not to such a degree, and honestly I didn't remember much about it. I guess I probably got stuck on it. It's a sequel that subscribes to basically bigger, better, faster, more. Well, bigger and more, and in many ways it is better. I mean, the animation is pretty much the same, the sound effects and voices aren't quite as good, the graphics are not as good. They're more detailed, they have more complexity to them, but they've also lost something. They've definitely lost their charm in my opinion. Now, in terms of the changes, in the first game you had one large map. In this game, what effectively you do, you've got a series of towers to go through, and you have to effectively get codes and solve puzzles to access that next tower, and then the next tower after that, and which is fine. But again, there's also more items, so instead of just being able to shut robots off and you reset lifts, now you can turn the lights on or off. You can get mines and bombs, and yeah, it's a more complex game and it is interesting to play, but I don't know, I really feel it's lost something as well. In some ways it feels like it maybe added a bit too much and changed things up a little bit too much. My understanding is that this game was built from the ground up and contains none of the existing code from the first game and was even made by a different team of people. So it makes sense that some of these changes are there. I say it is a good sequel, just not quite as good as the original, and I found reading the runes and the layouts and trying to solve them more challenging, and yeah, as a whole it just fell a little bit short of my expectation from the original. But again, that was a classic and I absolutely love that game, so it would have been hard for anything to live up to that.
Number 2.
Idium is considered something of a C64 classic. Developed by Andrew Braybrook and released by Houston, this space shoot 'em up plays things a little bit differently from your average shoot 'em up. Instead of just scrolling to the right, you can change directions and speed, even while you ship to its side for a moment. The plot involves something about some alien dreadnoughts invading Earth and you're the fighter that's going to fend them off. The level play areas are essentially the dreadnoughts themselves. Each stage is a separate dreadnought and you essentially have to destroy the various gun emplacements and its defences and initiate a destruct sequence on the dreadnought itself and escape. Sounds fairly straightforward, but it's quite a challenging game, especially when you first get started with it. It is fast paced, managing your speed, flipping and turning, and dodging the dreadnought's defences. It can be quite challenging. And once you've destroyed enough of its defences, you need to land so you can essentially detonate the ship. Fortunately, landing is as simple as getting over the landing strip. The destination sequence is essentially a way of getting a points bonus, and once you follow that sequence through, you get treated to a sequence where you fly off and escape the dreadnought as it explodes. Every level follows the same format, and once you get to grips with the game, it's relatively simple. Well, I say simple, the concept is simple, yet execution less so. As I mentioned, it is fast paced, and while you can manage your speed, going too slow and cautious can be problematic, but it is essential in some places. Flying low to the surface of the dreadnought to do damage to it, there are parts of the dreadnought you'll crash into, so flying around at speed, you're going to crash. Some sections even require you to flip your ship on its side and to navigate a very narrow passage. Played various versions of this over the years. I played on the Spectrum, the Amiga, and obviously the C64 version. For a long time, it was always a game that I wanted to like more than I did. I was quite young, I didn't have the instructions, and I was absolutely terrible at the game. But I'd play it trying to get good. I don't think I beat the first level for years. I had fun trying it. A very technically impressive game for the C64 with a really smooth scrolling, sort of a faux parallax. And I think it's a good looking game as well, though it doesn't get away from the C64 colour palette. It is a fantastic game once you kind of get past the barrier of entry and kind of figure out what you're doing. But on the Evercade with save states, there's not really much excuse to say for you not putting the effort in. You should, because it is justifiably a C64 classic. And before my ranking finishes, I should add there is an extra game. If you put in C64 Collection 1 and C64 Collection 2, you'll unlock the game Gyroscope. Now this only works on the VS and the Alpha, so yeah, if you're on EXP, the Super Pocket or the original handheld, sorry, you're out of luck there. It's a vague, the Marble Madness-like game where you control a gyroscope and you guide it around this maze, and it gets quite frustrating. But I haven't played that much and haven't gotten good at it, but I do vaguely remember playing this as a kid, and not doing very well at it then either. There is also a cart combo for putting in C64 2 and C64 3, but I'll cover that in my video for C64 3. Synapse.
Number 1.
The Sword of Fargo is an old school RPG, a roguelike if you will. When you boot up the game, your stats are randomised, you get plonked into the dungeon on your quest to go and retrieve the Sword of Fargo, which you have to go through many dungeon depths to get, and then once you've got it, you then have to escape the dungeon before the time runs out. And these dungeons are all randomised, which is the point I was trying to make when I started the sentence. Combat is very straightforward, you move into an enemy or they move into you, and it's auto resolved with dice rolls sort of behind the scenes. You have a number of spells at your disposal. Well, you have some that you start with and there's others you can pick up. A shield, a teleport, a light spell, and so on and so forth. The dungeons are populated with various enemies that get more powerful the deeper into the dungeon you go. There are also some checked blank squares which represent either a trap or an item, and you won't find what they are until you go onto them and take a chance. You could reveal a trap or some bonus item. Again, the randomisation plays a key part in this. There's also a temple on each level and treasure spread around as well. The treasure you gather when you go to a temple, you'll spend it and effectively it will give you more experience points. It's very much worth getting all the treasure you can get. However, there's a limit to how much treasure you can carry, so if you have too much it will bury it in the space where you picked it up from. So you might find yourself travelling back and forth, getting more treasure, going to the temple and getting more experience. The levels themselves are basically a blank slate when you start out, a sort of fog of war if you like, and as you explore it more will be revealed. However, there are circumstances where you can end up losing your map and everything goes blank again, you have to search it all out over again. It's also worth noting that the Sword of Fargo itself starts appearing somewhere after the 15th dungeon and could go on quite a level. I'm not really sure if there's even a limit to how many dungeons there are. I think I've gone to about depth of about 22 or maybe 25 in the past, and once you've gotten the Sword of Fargo, you have to make it back the way up to the surface before the time runs out. It's not too strict a time limit, but if you find yourself searching around, going back and forth, you could quickly run out of time. The first time I got near beating the game, I did run out of time, because I had no idea there was a time limit because I wasn't really paying that close attention. Also, once you have the Sword of Fargo, if enemies attack you and they get the jump on you, they may well steal the Sword of Fargo from you, in which case you'll have to go and find it again. But the countdown, if I recall correctly, doesn't restart. This is where the teleport spells come in handy. Effectively, you get attacked and press the teleport spell quick enough, you'll teleport to another area in that level of the dungeon, you'll still have the Sword of Fargo with a bit of luck. As you can tell from the visuals, it really doesn't look like much. There's really not much of those sound effects either. A game like this really isn't about the looks. Now, the other downside to this game is how the movement and turns work is you move around and every so often it will pause while the enemies take their turns, which is fine on the early levels, but as you get deeper into the dungeon, this becomes more frequent and seems to take longer. Later on in the game, it can be very slow progressing as you move a few squares, then you have to wait a few moments, then you can move a few more, and yeah, it can get a little bit tiresome. But honestly, in spite of that, I really like this game and I've played through it a number of times. Initially I wasn't sold on it, the movement and everything, and that those delays I just talked about put me off it, and it just seemed very basic. I would much rather go and play Rogue 64, one of the secret games on the Evercade. However, it came up in KD's challenge, and the challenge was to basically play through the game and beat it without save states. I did eventually manage it, but it was hard going. It took a few attempts, like the aforementioned one when I ran out of time. Successful run potentially could take you a few hours, so it's not really a quick game to play. And I know many people won't be so enamoured with this game as I am. I don't know many people who are, but yeah, I absolutely love it, and I think if you give it the time you might find something to enjoy. But again, if you don't like this sort of game, then yeah, pass it on by. That said, it's my favourite game on this collection, and is easily my most played. Okay, so there's my ranking done and dusted. As you can tell, I'm doing things a little bit differently here. Essentially, I'm recording each section piecemeal. The cart as a whole, I do really like it. There's a whole number of different games that I've got some appreciation for. Interestingly, although I have nostalgia for a similar amount of games on this collection as I did on the first one, the games I have nostalgia for I don't think are as strong as they were on the first game, or the first collection even. But I think the discoveries I've appreciated more. So overall it balances out, and like the first C64 collection, this won't be one for everyone. If you've got no nostalgia for the C64, and if you didn't like the first C64 collection, well, this isn't going to change your mind. It is more of the same in that respect. That aside, it is a solid collection with a decent amount of variety, as long as you're prepared to put the work in to enjoy these games. Very few of them are easy to pick up and play. Scoring it, I'd give it exact same score as I did the first collection, where we're giving it a 7.5 out of 10. It's a good collection for the right person. It's going to do nothing for the wrong people. I think that wraps things up for this review, so I'm going to leave you with a silly song based on one of the games from the collection, and I'll see you in the next video.
Deep in the cavern's shadows fall, a hero rises to heed the call. A blade of legend shrouded in lore, the sword of Fargo, it sleeps no more. Darkness creeps, the halls are cold, courage tested, brave and bold. Through traps and beasts, a journey untamed, Fargo whispers calling your name. Into the dungeon where danger lies, through the shadows the hero flies. Blade of power, fate intertwined, the sword of Fargo, your soul to bind. A treasure guarded by monstrous might, each step forward the dim torchlight. The walls are ancient, they seem alive, a maze unending, will you survive? Spirits haunt, the stakes are high, hear the echoes of the battle cry. With every strike, the legend grows, Fargo's secrets only it knows. Into the dungeon where danger lies, through the shadows the hero flies. Blade of power, fate intertwined, the sword of Fargo, your soul to bind. The final chamber, the blade in sight, a beacon burning through endless night. But foes arise, you cannot flee, the ultimate test of destiny. Spirits haunt, the stakes are high, hear the echoes of the battle cry. With every strike, the legend grows, Fargo's secrets only it knows. Into the dungeon where danger lies, through the shadows the hero flies. Blade of power, fate intertwined, the sword of Fargo, your soul to bind. Phantoms linger, stakes reach the sky, catch the whispers of the war-torn side. entwined.